Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Paradox Podcast. You thought we were gone, but we're back.
For good.
We will never disappear. You'll never get rid of us. What do you say? I'm Daniel Goldberg, Chief Marketing Officer at Paradox Interactive. I'm here with my good friend, Shams Trajani, Chief. What are you? Chief
Business Development Officer.
Chief Business Development Officer. Shams makes the business. I market the business.
Boom.
And we're
How
here
hard
to
can
talk
it be?
to you. We're here to talk about the business of video games, as we do. It should kind of be every second week of this podcast, but it's not because we're way late. I think we're like a month late with this episode.
No, it's worse than that. I think it's been way worse. It's like 2 months.
Jesus.
We've been very busy in our defense.
Yeah.
Actually, I also have a pretty other good excuse. I actually got the big Rona caught up with me.
Yeah.
I was home for like a good week with a mild case of COVID, but to me it felt like hell. So
How are you feeling now, Shams? Are you back? Are you back from Corona?
I had a very mild case. My taste is back, but my smell is to 10%, which means I only need to shower every 6 days. So it's working out pretty good so far.
Both you and me had the very mild version, it turns out. Neither of us have any sort of lasting, well, I don't think so anyway, any sort of lasting, what do you call it, symptoms or problems from this.
Cognitive impairment is the word you're looking for.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been a busy couple of days, busy couple of months, weeks, whatever. I think.
What else has been eating time?
So we announced recently that we're delaying Bloodlines 2 again.
Whoopsie.
Big thing for us. I don't know. We're spending a lot of time now in the management team talking about like our strategic direction, where we're going as a business. Partly prompted by that, of course. Which I hope maybe we can share more about in a sort of forthcoming episode of the podcast. We're gonna be moving into the undergarments business.
Exactly.
That's like
Watch out, Bjorn Borg. No, I mean we discussed this before the podcast, so we don't want to make sound like we have this big cryptic thing. But sometimes you'll hear people talking about strategic stuff or whatever it may be, and we'd like to be able to say that we've been spending a lot of time talking about strategic stuff, and we would then like to be able to come back here and talk about the result of that kind of discussion stuff. So what we suits are doing all day long, and stuff like that.
Yeah. And sort of the topic of today we thought is going to be quite similar to that. We were actually planning on having our chief financial officer, CFO Alex, on the episode to talk about what it's like being a listed company, what it's like being a listed publisher of games.
Yeah.
Alex too busy to be on the podcast this
He's
week.
talking to too many investors.
Yeah, that's what it's like being a listed company. So we're gonna have to do that for the next episode. Instead, we'd like to talk about something that is, I think, quite current for us anyway, which is what do we do when we're successful, and also what do we do when we're not successful. The fall and the last couple of months have been quite interesting for us in that sense, because we recently released one of our most successful games ever in the form of Crusader Kings 3. Yeah. We also very recently released, I wouldn't say one of our least successful games ever, because I know you've got some bangers in your closet, Shams, on that. But we released Empire of Sin, which did not perform as expected. It wasn't really received in the way we kind of hoped for. Hasn't really sold in the way we hoped for. And it's just interesting to contrast those, like what happens internally with that. How
Behind
do we,
the scenes,
how does that affect our planning? How does that affect what we do both in the short and the long term? So maybe share some insight on that.
Yeah.
We thought would be interesting. But I think before we move on to that, what have you been playing recently, Shams?
I have been playing a stupid amount of Magic: The Gathering Arena.
Oh, the mobile version?
Yeah, I've been playing it on mobile. It's fairly fine, but I've just been playing the PC version like crazy. But otherwise, I did actually put my misconceptions to the side and dove headfirst into the beautiful world of Valheim. Developed and published by fellow Swedish developers and publishers. To see what all the hype was about. And I think it's, on one hand, it makes my life a living hell, because then everyone comes out of the woodworks saying, why didn't we sign that game? That's the first question everyone asks. Then everyone asks, why can't we sell 5 million copies over one weekend? Like, why are you so bad? And I'm like, well, obviously I don't have the skill that those guys have. But it does prompt a lot of good discussions because then the same people ask me, I don't get it because the game looks terrible. Yeah. And they're like, and also the UI looks terrible. And also the UX is terrible and it runs poorly. And the user score is at 97. What the hell is going on? Mm-hmm. And that's what happens, kids, when you try to chase quality instead of value, I think is the shorthand. Valheim provides an insane amount of value. It's not only pretty fun, it's easy to get into, and the price point is fairly low. And we've, for the past 10 years, been playing these kind of games. And none of them have come in the Viking flavor. So it's pretty easy to just jump in and just do that thing. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't have the best animations or textures or whatever it is. It's fun where it needs to be fun, and all the rest of it they can figure out the next 10, 15 years as this turns into a mega franchise, if Coffee Stain do all that they need to do.
All the right things when you're successful,
all the right things, yeah, when they're successful.
I've also been jumping back into Magic. I think my user journey here is quite interesting, as we say in marketing land. Frequent listeners of this podcast know that that's pretty much what you and me do, Shams, is play Magic the Gathering. And I've been a huge fan of Arena. I've sunk like endless hours into it since it first, since the open beta. I actually got into the closed one, I think. Anyway, I can't remember. I've been playing
endless
for a long
money
time.
As well. Have you spent?
Yeah, well, not that much. I'm quite frugal with my spend.
Okay, so what is frugal to you, Daniel Goldberg?
I don't know, like 10, 20 US dollars a month.
Okay, then you're quite frugal, like
yeah. I don't spend that much. You spend way more than I do.
Yes,
sure.
I do.
But anyway, I've been sort of eagerly awaiting the mobile release for what feels like years now. Maybe it has been years. I don't know. But then it came out, and I played it a couple of times. But what it really made me do was dive back into the PC version. Yeah, I find that quite interesting. I sort of downloaded it on my phone, played it a few times, but I didn't stick with the mobile version. But I was kind of reactivated as a player in the PC client instead. Sure, which is quite interesting to me. Yeah, and then I've actually been going back into Halo. This is one of my guilty pleasures is Halo.
This is Game Pass pleasure also, I hear.
Yeah, I mean I own all of the Halo games. Going back to the first one, but I think the reason I picked it up is probably because it sort of appeared in front of me on Game Pass. I love the Halo games, man. So good. So
they're great.
Yeah, they are. So that's kind of me. I don't think, and there's some interesting super secret paradox stuff I've been playing as well, but we can't talk about that yet.
Actually, yeah.
But yeah, so that's it. Another month in Magic Land, I guess. Let's get this show on the road then.
Right. So highs and lows we were talking about. So in the span of 4 months, I think we had the most successful launch, highest rated, Metacritic rated game, Crusader Kings. And then some months later in December, we had the launch of Empire of Sin, which was one of the lowest rated games, we can say, in recent history, right? So we had highs and lows within a couple of months. And being much closer to the publishing part of the business than I am, can you talk about kind of the first part? What happened? We spoke a little bit about this on the episode of what happens when CK is released and it does well with Christian Daflos. But from your perspective, what's the follow-up in, and how do we act when something is that big of a success?
Yeah, so the interesting thing here, and this is painful to say as someone who works in publishing and marketing, is that however hard you try, you never really know if a game is going to be successful until it's actually in the hands of the players. I mean, you can do all the user testing you want. You can do all of the, whichever way you choose to try to measure and quantify quality. And we're getting quite good at that, I would say. But you never really know until the game is out. Mm-hmm. And CK3, I think it's fair to say, kind of overperformed. It sold better and it reviewed better, and it just the player the KPIs we track, the retention of players, the number of existing Paradox players who chose to dive into CK3, and the number of new players we attracted to that game, it kind of overperformed on all fronts. Even though we knew we had a great game on our hands, and even though we were very happy with all of the all of the sort of pre-release metrics that we've been tracking on that game, it still came in better than that, right? So that's interesting, because of course in the run up to the release of a game, we always try, as we've talked about in this podcast, our intention is never to just release a game and then forget about it and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Our business is really about establishing games that can live for a long time, and that we can sort of that we can continue to update with new content, whether free or paid content, for until the end of time and until the end of the universe, if you will. So there are all of these discussions leading up to the release of a game about the pre-release roadmap, as we call it. Are we doing enough stuff? Should we invest more? And on CK3, those conversations started a long time before the game hit the market. But it's not until the game is actually live when you see, holy shit, we have millions of people here who are playing this game and really enjoying it, and a huge portion of them are likely to if we give them more stuff to buy, they will very likely buy it, right? So, and I think a lot of credit should go to PDS here, Charlotta, who heads up the studio organization, everyone who sort of works on CK3. A lot of time and a lot of effort went into figuring out ways of actually moving, increasing the amount, figuring out a way on how we could put more resources onto CK3 to produce more stuff, right? For the game once it was live. And the end result of that is that we sort of refreshed and reviewed the post-release roadmap, and we're now ending up in a place where we're actually going to be able to support the game with more content in the near future than we kind of originally anticipated for the game, right?
Okay.
And I think the thing that might not be visible from the outside is how hard this is. I mean,
just make more seems like an easy thing to say.
Just make more. How hard can it be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, putting all of the creative discussions aside, like, it also needs to be good stuff. It needs to be of interest to the player base, and it needs to be content that we're proud of. It's also just a manpower question. I mean, we're a big company now. We have several studios all across the world working on a huge number of projects. It's not like we have a team of very talented developers who are also very well versed in the art of creating content for grand strategy games. It's not like we have a lot of those people just sitting around waiting for something to do. So it immediately becomes a question of priorities, right? What is more important? Is this more important than that? What is the, if we move these people to this project, what happens to this other project that is in the pipeline, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and I can add to that even if we had an army of developers doing it, there are production limitations and pipeline limitations that just make it impossible to pipe in. Anyone who's played Factorio knows how important logistic pipelines is. And it's just getting, even if we make all that content, getting it in, balancing it out, making sure it runs with all the other systems that are being redesigned and overhauled all the time, it's difficult to do.
And then that's obviously in addition to all of the publishing stuff, which is, okay, so what we're actually seeing very good results on our marketing spend on CK3. So how can we do more? How can we acquire even more players into this game? And that also, like, on the just on the surface of it, it's like, how hard can it be? You just buy more ads and that will drive more users. But it's not just that. It's also like, how do you plan out more community engagement activations? How do you create more? How do you drive the creation of more creative that will actually convince people to jump on whatever content it is that you're giving them? So it's just the logistics of it, the logistics of scaling up and sort of reaping the rewards of a success is, it's a bit of a headache for, I think
it's
all
a good
people
problem
involved.
to have.
Yeah, and then you've also got there's obviously the short-term versus the long-term perspective here. I mean, on the one hand, yes, you've got a huge group of players who are really into this game now. So, I mean, I think Northern Lords is a good example. The first flavor pack, or the first DLC that we released for Crusader Kings recently, we had a long discussion about the price point on that. It's like, okay, so and Northern Lords was received very, very well by the player base. What's the best way to leverage that? Is it better to go out with something that is fairly cheap, given the amount of content you get in it, because that will of course influence the perception of it. If people perceive this as something that where you're actually not paying that much and you're getting a lot of good stuff in return for your money, that's going to drive a more positive reception of this DLC, which you would argue would in turn drive more interest around Crusader Kings 3 as a whole, and maybe drive increased sales of the base game. Is that the better way of approaching this? Or do you take this opportunity and actually raise the price point on this, because you're likely to, in the short term, that's going to yield you more results from the player base you have, but it might not be as helpful in terms of getting new people into the franchise, or keeping people engaged and positive around the game in the long term. So there's a ton of tiny little decisions that go into this, and I think it's easy to think that a successful games means that everything's fun, but it's
a lot of
hard.
Added pressure.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean that's something that's been taking up a lot of our time over the past couple of months. I don't know, historically, Shams, I mean, you've been here for a long time. If you look at the way our grand strategy catalog in particular has evolved, because we've been in this situation many times before. I mean, we were in the similar situation, even though the numbers were smaller, on Stellaris back in the day, which is like 4 or 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
What were the discussions like back then? I know we rushed to get Leviathans, I think, was the first piece of DLC.
No, I think just without delving into specifics, but we often end up with that kind of problems where we know it's successful, we want to capitalize it, and then it's like, okay, we don't want to work people to the bone, but at the same time, there's a moment to capitalize on things, and we know from experience of trying to rush things, there's a price to pay down the line. So it's always this balance of, okay, holy shit, this is successful, what do we do now? And in some cases we're super slow. Like, when City Skylines came out, I think the deal to get the game out on console was made within like 2 months. It then took like 2.5 years before it actually was released. Yeah. Because of limitations, who's doing it, what's not. So it's always a trade-off there, and there's also this creative aspect of, it takes such a stamina on the development side to get a game to the finish line. But the crazy thing is that just the finish line is the starting point of another fucking marathon on our end, and it requires other creative juices. You need people who a lot of people have a lot of their, not careers, I would say, but they set milestones for themselves, and they want to see something across the finish line. Then they go on paternity leave, and then there's a bit of a changing of the guard and stuff like that. So there's no matter of planning for success is going to you're still shifting a gear, and that has a noticeable effect to the overall speed of the vehicle, so to say. So it's a kind of.
And I think on the topic of partnerships as well, I mean, once a game is out and sort of a proven thing where success is proven, of course, interest from, whether it's new platforms, new storefronts, other publishers who might want to do things with you, that all kind of comes when the thing is proven. Interest for a console port or a brand collaboration might be very low before the game is out, but once the game is out and successful, hey, suddenly that interest and those opportunities kind of present themselves, and that's another opportunity cost to take into account. And the answer to all of this is obviously planning. Like, plan for this stuff way in advance. But the problem with that is, again, you never really know until you know whether a game is successful, which I think brings us on to Empire of Sin, which is very much the opposite type thing, right?
Yeah.
A game that released and did not perform according to expectations. Well, we've already committed to, together with the devs and also in some respects, in communication with our fans and our players to what the roadmap for this game will look like. And that's not something that you can just, you can't just stop doing what you've promised to do, even though you know that this isn't going to be the business success that you kind of hoped for or planned for,
of course,
given the performance of the game so far. And then I guess at the end of the day, this becomes a brand question for us as a publisher as well. Like, what do we, how important is it for us to to fulfill the promises we've made to our players, for example, through selling an expansion pass bundle on Empire of Sin, versus how important is our short-term business results. Because
of course, absolutely. Go ahead.
Doing that might not, the sort of short-term sound business decision might be, hey, let's not do these 2 expansions that we've already promised that we should be doing.
Yeah.
But I think where we come from, we think, and we're not the only ones doing this. I think this is, most people in the industry would share this sentiment. We think that the long-term commitment to the games we put out is very, very important. And even though short-term, it might, if you just look at the numbers, it might make more sense to say, hey, let's just do this, and let's move these resources and move our investments to something new or something different. It's important to sort of honor those commitments and give this time, give this game more time, and give this game the sort of attention and love that we think it requires to become what it, what we want it to become, right? So making sure we deliver on the roadmap that we've committed to already.
I feel it very much comes back to the relationship we're cultivating and building with the players. I mean, we're asking them to give us money.
Yes.
And that's a pretty big ask. And when something doesn't fully work out, even if it's good, we're still saying there's a commitment from us that we'll carry on and do stuff. And I think we were in a similar situation with Imperator came out.
Yes.
We knew a big reason of why we continued on with Imperator because it was the right thing to do, and we kind of promised and we thought that there was a good potential in the game. But we also know that these games don't exist in a vacuum. Our players are aware of the other games in our ecosystem, and what we do in one game affects the other as well. Like, had we abandoned Imperator, we wouldn't have done that. But had we done that, that would probably have a confidence impact in CK on some level. But this actually goes beyond that as well, because we can talk about how we intersect with different parts of the kind of ecosystem. We talk about players, we talk about our developers, and we're talking also about our partners, right? We want our partners to see Paradox as somebody who's reliable, consistent in their way of doing business. They're not going to cut chase the moment things turn tough. But also in terms of us being a publisher for a third-party developer like Romero Games. The next time we're going out and finding other partners to work with, everything is fine and dandy when you're selling 5 million copies. They're generally, most problems squash themselves. But when there are tricky situations, we want to be able to say that we're kind of an upstanding publisher, a publishing partner as well, and that's really important to us.
I think Imperator in many ways proves this out. Imperator was at release not well received by its player base. Did pretty good numbers, I would say, but the sort of long-term retention on the game wasn't what we wanted, and it was also pretty clear that whilst we had a very successful launch of the game, sales figures kind of tapered off quite quickly, much more so than we see on most of our other grand strategy games. But we decided at a very early stage to stick with the game and continue along the content roadmap that we had planned out for it. And if you've been following Imperator, you can see that both perception of the game and also player numbers have increased massively and improved massively over the past couple of months, especially given the release of the latest update to the game. And I think partly this is obviously financially, this is good. This, in the long term, sticking with that game and giving it more time to develop was the right decision for us. But I think internally it's also very important because, I mean, making games is a creative effort, right? Anyone who's involved in it wants to do this, or is really doing this because you want that positive reaction from the players or the people who actually consume the thing you're creating, right? And just in terms of I don't know if self-esteem is the right word, but just in terms of our faith in ourselves and our ability to deliver these sort of weird, deep, endless games that we're kind of known for, just seeing this game come back and find a sort of a second lease of life is a very powerful thing, and I think very motivating for a lot of people internally at Paradox.
Yeah. Oh,
what sure. Have you played Imperator recently, Shaps? Have you sort of
no, but I do
partaken in the
I haven't delved into the Roman setting. I do, however, follow the threads quite frequently on Reddit. There's almost with every update somebody asks, is the game worth playing now? Because obviously there were a lot of people who got burned, and there are a lot of people who are like, who are interested but wary. And it's been really interesting to see the journey of, for a very long time, the answer was still coming back, no, it's not ready yet. But that's over time shifted to a lot of maybes, some yeses, and over time a lot of yeses. And I think it's pretty kind of evenly split. The game has its things that it does well, and then it comes back to the different flavors. But it's it's been interesting to follow that, and I think it's again, coming back to what I spoke about previously, the creative aspect of, like, okay, you didn't stick the landing perfectly. Do you have the stamina and energy to stick with it and creatively push on? Because the first creative instinct is like, screw this, let's move on to the next one. Because it's like, the next one I can get it right. But persevering there takes a different type of morale, I would say.
And this is also about what's important, maybe not what's important, but how we sort of, different projects and different games have different strategic value for us as a publisher, where, our grand strategy games, for sure, things like Crusader Kings and the Crusader Kings franchise, where it's a CK3 is a sequel to a very, very, very proven game and a very, very successful game, but also things like Imperator that is built by PDS, which is our over time our most successful internal studio, and the studio that sort of carries a huge chunk of our financial success on their shoulders. That is very important for us. It's important for us to not do, and it's again partly about brand perception, but also for us and our sort of own understanding of the business we're in. It's very important for us not to fail when we release new grand strategy games. A game like Empire of Sin, which is developed by a third-party studio, it's a strategy game, but it's farther from what we see as our core and our sort of proven business.
It's a new IP as well.
Exactly. Our appetite for it's kind of less important for us that every game of that nature that we put out is a success. It's part of the thing. That's part of why you do, or why we do third-party publishing anyways, to explore and try new things. And then it's just kind of part of the game that some of those things fails, and some of those things fail. Some of them are very successful and hopefully become the next City Skylines, right?
I would maybe alter. It's kind of hard to compare different ones. Like, obviously core business is more important than something that is less of a core business, but it's just like you said, it's the nature of the beast that if you try something with a new partner on a new IP in a new kind of product segment, it's obviously going to be fraught with more dangers than doing the third iteration or the 17th grand strategy game in a row. Obviously it's going to be very different things. So that awareness of what is your core business and core strengths versus this is what we would like to turn into our core strength tomorrow, and that's a topic we'll be coming back to a lot, I think, this year.
And I mean, it's not the main takeaways aren't that hard to figure out. Like, anyone who's followed us over the past couple of years, you can clearly see that a lot of the growth in our company is driven by sort of repeated success on our proven core franchises. And it, again, coming back to what do you do when you're successful? Long term, it's really about how do we set this company up to continue that growth journey and continue to make sure that the proven games that we have on the market will continue to deliver the growth we need in order to be able to fund things of a more experimental nature, whether they are Bloodlines 2, or whether they are other things, or whether they are Empire of Sin, so that you end up in a place where your core business is kind of healthy enough to allow things of a more unproven nature to become the cherry on top, so to say. Our survival as a company does not hinge on that.
No.
But if it's very successful, then that kind of opens up a new opportunity for us and allows us to take another leap forward in our development as a publisher.
And I think it's really important to point this out. If you look at our historical track record, this is exactly how the core business has been: the grand strategy games, and once in a while, one of those weird games we've published turned out to be a Mountain Blade, or a Magicka, or a City Skylines, or a Pillars of Eternity. And things really took off. And that in turn allowed us to do, like, Stellaris would not have happened had Magicka not become a big success.
Why? That's interesting. What do you mean by that? I've not heard that
because Magicka accelerated our growth tremendously. It stood for a huge part of our profit. We went from how are we going to pay salaries this month to, okay, we can now invest more in our future.
Right.
And that allowed us to make Stellaris a much more ambitious game than it could have been, instead of being much more small and conservative. And but many of those bets don't work out. Well, that's the nature of the game.
And I think maybe one realization, and I think CK3 is maybe the sort of ultimate proof of that, is the games, our grand strategy games, are now much larger than I think any of us could have even dreamed of a couple of years ago. I don't know, Shams. Yeah. Would you have said 5 years ago that a Paradox grand strategy game would be one of the top selling PC games in the world?
No. And you and I talked about this extensively when CK3 came out. I think that there's been maybe because we've been this niche player, and there's maybe been a lack of confidence because we've always been the small kid in some ways. The industry's always had their big blockbusters, and we're like, okay, they're doing their big adult stuff and we're doing our weird stuff in the back of the room. And then suddenly we're realizing, holy shit, we're actually on par with some of these releases. And what if we are the Halos of tomorrow if we just keep on doing it? But if you look at the movie entertainment business, weird comics from the 70s and 80s are completely dominating the movie industry. The biggest franchises are weird Marvel characters.
Yes.
So I don't know how many people are reading comics today. Probably more now thanks to the Marvel movies, but it's still tiny compared to how people consume, or younger generations consume, their main form of media, which is video games. So in 20 years, somebody, the equivalent to the brothers who directed the Endgame movies for the Marvel franchise, they're probably CK players today. There was this viral clip of some, Big Brother contestant in Brazil who's talking in front of his entire house mates of how CK3 was his favorite game. And there's just a bunch of hot Brazilian men and women who were talking about CK. Weird stuff.
Yeah, but I think that's an important realization, is that what we still see as kind of nerdy and niche and weird little games that not that many people in the world do except for us, is actually becoming, the CK3 is not a small niche game anymore. This is a big thing.
It's our Marvel.
That is true. And I think that realization is something that has grown a lot within Paradox. Yeah. Not everyone. A lot of people, if you ask Johan Andersson, I'm sure he will say that I said this 15 years ago and you guys are all idiots for not realizing sooner. But just this realization that the core of what we do has potential to grow a lot larger than maybe we've ever kind of imagined in the past is important. And that is something that I think will influence us as a company a lot going forward.
Yeah. True.
Holy shit, that was pretty heavy words.
Maybe we should quit while we're ahead.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. What's next on your agenda, Shams? What are you doing immediately after this?
Oh man, you know what I'm going back to. We're going to be talking about proven versus unproven quite a lot. It's something that it's on the tip of my tongue, and therefore I'm talking to everyone about it at Paradox. And we're going to talk more about how we differentiate between how we work with what's proven, the CKs, and the Empire of Sins of tomorrow. Because we'll be doing many, many, many more Empire of Sin experiences in one way, shape, or the other. And by that I mean stuff that is first with a new developer that we don't have completely figured out, while at the same time also getting to, I want us to make another Rome. We should make Imperator 2. But that kind of depends on how we tie off the story of Imperator 1, maybe.
Good stuff. All right. I think we'll do more of that in the next podcast episode. As always, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, we're on the Paradox forums. We're on Twitter. Please smash that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned for the next episode of the Paradox podcast, which will hopefully arrive not 3 months from now, but hopefully a couple of weeks from now, given everything goes according to plan. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye bye.
Adios, muchachos.